I think in the discussion of what's going on in Colombia and Venezuela, the channel has gotten a little ahead of itself, and I need to go back a little bit and start from the beginning. I had mentioned before that I was stationed down there, so some of the things that I take for granted that people out there might know, they might not, and that's my fault. So we're going to go back a little bit to the very beginning of why in this region down here socialism seems to be more popular than you would think it would be. See, here in America, we have a lot of things we take for granted. We think we live in this capitalistic, imperialistic utopia, that capitalism solves everything and free markets solve everything. Well, they don't. We just don't. It's just so much of a part of our daily lives, the socialism that the U.S. takes for granted, that they don't even see it. And the things that we have, they don't have down there. And I've written down a bunch of things that I'm going to cover real quick. Roads, bridges, tunnels, our Eisenhower Expressway, the standards for building those, and that we have those all maintained and ready to be driven on at any time, and signage and training programs for our young people to teach them how to drive cars properly and drive different vehicles all the way up to Class A CDLs. All that's government run. That has nothing to do with private enterprise. In fact, private enterprise does everything it can to get around those laws and those stipulations. Our power grid, and this is really applicable now in Puerto Rico. We have a socialized maintenance of a power grid. The government is taking care of electricity on all levels, electricity, natural gas, heating oil, on all levels, all the way down to the local level, regional level, state level. These are things that are not run by private organizations for the most part. And it is something that the U.S. government has set a standard for. And I know people are like, well, I'm trying to conflate two things, governmental control and socialism. These things are services that we have that these people down here don't have, they don't have on a regular basis. And it's something that they're trying to build to. Education. We have mandated educational standards to a certain level now. There's all sorts of arguments and debates about what should and shouldn't be taught in schools and all this, but that we have them, and that they're mandated, and you have to send your kids, and they have to pass certain tests to get to certain levels, and to have high school diplomas or equivalents thereof to get jobs is a socialist tenet. It's socialized education. Even before this argument with whether it's going to be the Republican version of socialized medicine or the Democrat version of socialized medicine, before all of this, you could have walked into an emergency room anywhere and they would have kept you alive. That was never an issue. It was all about the cost of it and who was going to pay for what. But it was never about denial of services. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody who says, well, I didn't get this service or that service. Life-saving services were always something that was ingrained in American culture, and that's socialized medicine. That's not something you can say exists in any of the countries on your screen, other than, well, take Florida out of there, but down here, it's just not a given that that's the case. We have food safety standards. We have clean water standards that are all socially driven, that are all government and tax money driven. 911 services. I think that's something that a lot of people, after these hurricanes, are starting to rethink. FEMA, the Red Cross, all of these things that, we all contribute, put money into, so that when something like this happens, we have a place to go. If your relative is having a heart attack, or your child has fallen and hurt themselves badly, you're going to just take for granted you can go to your phone, dial 911, and someone from the government's going to be there. Whether it's a policeman, fire, ambulance, local government, whoever, that's just right to it. Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and welfare. Taking care of the elderly, taking care of the poor. That is something that's been going on in America for 50, 60, 70 years. And some of those things even farther back. Our court system, civil and criminal justice. That once again, if somebody does wrong to you or robs you or commits a crime, you can go to the local police forces and pick up the phone and go talk to somebody, and it doesn't always work. It's not perfect. But in a lot of these countries down here, that doesn't exist. Employment laws, OSHA and workman's comp. You go out, you have a job, and you fall and break your arm. You do that in Nicaragua, too bad. Such is life. Go find a better job and be careful with that one better than you were at ours. That's just the way it is down there. So when these people talk about wanting socialism, when they, and trying to run their countries in a socialist manner, these are the kind of things that they're talking about that we take for granted. We have a base of socialism that we rely on, a net of socialism, so that we can pretend that we're, this wonderful capitalist society. Having been in the military is the ultimate socialist experiment. Everybody wears the same clothes. Everybody sleeps in the same bed. Everybody has the same mission. You eat the same food. You march in the same lines. You follow the same orders. You wear the same. Everybody's the same. And you have all of your needs and desires and wants, well, not desires, I guess, but you have all of your needs taken care of. If you need to go to the medical facility for something, you go. Nobody sends you a bill for it. If you need uniforms, they're provided. And you get a paycheck on top of it, and all sorts of other bennies. And that is socialism. Every soldier, sailor, airman, marine knows this. And even after you're out, you have this, these government-provided checks for retirement and for disability and for benefits and all these kinds of things. And so I think it's an important thing to understand that these countries that are moving toward socialism, Venezuela and all of these Central American countries, what they're pushing for is the same things we have here. And none of those things I just described were as the result of capitalism. Now, you can say that the tax money came from that. That's true. But it was the chicken and the egg kind of argument. We had the services before we had this, wonderfully successful capitalist country. Those were things that were prior to. When I was in high school, I think the Dow Jones was at 1,200 in 1987. And now it's 15,000, 16,000. The U.S. wasn't anywhere near what it is now as far as, and we had socialized all those different things I just described, prior to that 20, 30, 40 years. And we didn't even have income tax withholding prior to World War II. So when you see articles like this, where these people are fighting for what we call the evils of Marxism or the evils of communism, you can look at where these people are sitting and how they're living. And, and they see the things we take for granted. They see the metric tons of food we throw away. And they see the U.S. becoming the most obese country on the planet. And having to buy electronic equipment to work out on so that we aren't as heavy as we should be, and then we hire movers to move that electronic equipment around from house to house to house. It just makes no sense at all. So that's why they have a hard time listening to us when it comes to how things should be, especially with the mandated petrodollar, and when they talk about having to print money and print bolivars and all of this type of thing. The U.S. has been printing money for years. We just have a completely different angle on the world than they do. And this is, to Puerto Rico, it's going to start to be like that down there. They're going to get a real good taste of what Colombia and Venezuela and Ecuador and Nicaragua have been like for a very long time. And that's why they have more of a leaning toward guys like Maduro. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with the guy. He's a strong man. He's a drug dealer and all this, but the desire, their methodology of getting to where they're going is wrong, but their desire is to have the basic fundamental services that the U.S. has taken for granted for a long time. So it's they're trying to consolidate. They really are. The Venezuelans are trying to pull the Colombians away from the U.S., and with the current administrator helping, all he can to push the Colombians away, push the Panamanians away. They are going to push themselves right back into the situation they were in 150 years ago, where they would have an opportunity to unite under one strong leader down there and try to begin to forge their own direction away from the United States. All of the years of talking about, from our government about how much they hate people, dark-skinned people from south of the border, which is how it's being taken, that they don't want them there, they don't want them around. And then this U.S. policy of taking their money away from something they've been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years, it's all going to, whether it was the intent or not, the effect is going to be that. The effect is going to be that all of these countries down here, Cuba, Haiti, Honduras, Colombia, Venezuela, who knows with Puerto Rico now, the way they're being ignored by the U.S., they're all going to realize that they have the same view of the world, and that view is not looking at the U.S. very kindly. And they will eventually. Somebody's going to pull the trigger. Somebody is going to say, okay, you know what, we're going to take the lead on making this issue happen, where we're going to reunite back under Gran Colombia, with the help and the finance of the Russians, and they'll do it backdoor, get the money in there, and then they'll have this entire area right south of our border to just sit and make our life miserable. Absolutely miserable. If we thought the Cuban Missile Crisis was bad with what's coming. Yeah, and you just would have to know about what you would have to live down there. And I know a lot of my folks out, a lot of my audience, people out there have spent time in these areas, and it's hard when you go to the tourist areas of Panama, the tourist areas of Costa Rica, to really get the feel of what it's like in the interior, and the poverty, the abject poverty they live in. And now, but some of these areas with abject poverty are starting to have access to the internet and see that, how the world is outside of their little corner of it, and they're like, hey, we want a piece of that. And there are these strong men that are going to say, hey, we can get you a piece of that, but you've got to get away from the U.S. So anyway, my 10 cents on that. I hope it's cleared some things up. If anyone has any questions, please feel free. Down in the comments, like, share, subscribe. Thank you everyone for the support. Really appreciate it. We'll see you next time.